When I came home from work, an envelope was waiting for me on our bed. Inside was a sheet of paper, perfectly folded, with my wife's elegant handwriting across the top. Bedroom rules. At first, I thought it had to be a joke or some playful roleplay idea. But the moment I opened it, confusion gave way to disbelief. Effective immediately, the bold header declared. Beneath it was a numbered list of 15 rules dictating every part of our intimacy. Rule 1. Intimacy only on Tuesdays and Saturdays, 9 to 10:30 p.m. Rule 2. No spontaneous initiation without 3 hours written notice. Rule 3. Only 3 pre-approved positions. It continued, covering everything, duration limits, mandatory showering, even which words I was allowed to say. 5 years of marriage, and suddenly I needed written authorization to touch my own wife. One rule in particular stopped me cold. Rule 11. Performance will be evaluated weekly with feedback forms. Was this really the same woman who used to drag me into closets at family gatherings just 2 years ago? I heard her car pull into the driveway. Instead of confronting her, I slipped the list into my pocket. At dinner, she kept throwing me sidelong glances, waiting for me to bring it up. I stayed casual, talking about work and asking about her day. Her fingers tapped restlessly against her water glass. "Did you see what I left for you?" she asked at last, after half an hour of small talk. The list of demands? Yes, I saw it. Her eyes narrowed at my phrasing. They're not demands, they're boundaries. It wasn't the first time she'd tried something like this. Last month, she reorganized my closet, tossing out clothes she disapproved of. 2 weeks ago, she installed a tracking app on my phone for safety, she claimed. Each time, I pushed back calmly, but firmly. But this? This was different. This crossed the line I couldn't ignore. Where is this coming from? I asked evenly. Because this isn't something married couples normally do. She straightened in her chair like a politician about to unveil a new policy. Carla says clear guidelines are essential for a modern marriage. Plus, I read online that most relationship issues come from unclear expectations. Yes, Carla. The recently divorced best friend who's been drip-feeding her bad advice like it's gospel. The same woman who swears her husband's greatest failure was giving her too much freedom. Imagine that, freedom, the silent killer of marriages everywhere. My wife's voice took on a rehearsed, TED Talk quality. I've spent a lot of time analyzing our relationship. These rules will provide structure and improve our satisfaction metrics. Satisfaction metrics. She was officially talking about our marriage like she was conducting a customer service survey. Please rate your husband's performance on a scale of 1 to 5, and don't forget to leave comments in the feedback form. This wasn't my wife speaking anymore. It was some bizarre combination of Carla, an HR manual, and a motivational YouTube coach. I see, was all I said, going back to my dinner. My calmness threw her off. She clearly expected fireworks, or at least a counteroffer. Instead, she got nothing. Later that night, when she tried to reopen the topic, I told her I needed time to process and went to sleep in the guest room like an employee calling in sick. The next day, I slipped out early. By mid-morning, her texts started rolling in, first casual, then increasingly desperate, as if I were a project deadline she couldn't get an extension on. I told her we'd talk that evening. Meanwhile, I was sketching out my response, not just to the ridiculous rulebook, but to the bigger issue, the slow-motion hostile takeover of our marriage. That little list of hers forced me to admit something I'd been avoiding. Our relationship wasn't evolving, it was mutating. The woman who used to value spontaneity and respect now wanted to run our marriage like a bureaucratic agency issuing permits for hand-holding. By the time I drove home, I made up my mind. My answer would be simple, final, and crystal clear. Either we tear up the rulebook and rebuild respect, or I walk. I was done filing paperwork for intimacy. Looking back, none of this came out of nowhere. Control crept in the way ivy creeps up a wall, slowly, quietly, until suddenly you realize your whole house is suffocating. It started small, 2 years ago. Innocent little comments about my shirts, my friends, my free time. Then came the first big play. I had an annual fishing trip with my buddies. She forgot and scheduled a dinner with her boss the same weekend. When I reminded her of my plans, she didn't argue. Oh no, she went full Academy Award tears. I feel abandoned. My career might suffer if I go alone, so I canceled. She showered me with gratitude and affection, and I thought, wow, I'm a great husband. In reality, I just rewarded the behavior. After that, the pattern grew. She wanted my gym schedule changed. She didn't like being alone in the evenings. Drinks with friends. Suddenly suspicious. My diet? Monitored like I was on parole. Each change seemed small, reasonable, even loving in the moment. And every time I gave in, I got a gold star and a kiss. But the gold stars ran out. The affection dwindled. And our intimacy. Well, let's just say the goalposts didn't move, they were locked away in storage, and I needed a 3-hour written notice just to approach them. What started as innocent little, I really like when you comment somehow evolved into, do you have 2 jabs, and then into full-on commandments. Every concession I made was like blood in the water. Her demands only got bolder. 6 months ago, she officially assassinated spontaneity. Physical affection could only happen if it followed her carefully choreographed script. Any deviation was met with sighs, lectures, or her patented, suddenly not in the mood maneuver. Romance had been replaced with performance anxiety, and the constant feeling I was about to step on a landmine. The night before she unveiled her infamous rulebook, I got a sneak preview of what was coming. I leaned over to kiss her shoulder while she read in bed. Nothing wild, just a simple gesture. She recoiled like I'd licked her with a live wire. I can't just switch into that mode without preparation, she snapped. Preparation. Like intimacy now required a flight plan and 3 business days' notice. When I asked when the right time would be, she coldly informed me she'd let me know. That was the moment it hit me. Intimacy wasn't love anymore. It was a resource she rationed out like wartime sugar, rewarding good behavior and punishing disobedience. I went to bed unsettled, but still unprepared for the laminated constitution of the bedroom that appeared the next day. Looking back, the list wasn't a new development. It was just the formal codification of the unwritten laws I'd already been living under. And honestly, it wasn't the absurd content that disturbed me most, though feedback forms deserves its own comedy sketch. What really got me was what it represented, the total demolition of mutual respect. I was no longer a husband. I was a subordinate, expected to follow orders and salute. That evening, after our brief, surreal dinner conversation, she watched TV while I retreated to my home office. I opened my laptop and did what any sane man would do. I started snooping. Sure enough, her browser history lit up like a red flag convention. Titles like Power Dynamics in Marriage and How to Train Your Husband. Oh, and the piece de resistance. She was active on an online forum where women exchanged tactics for domesticating their partners. Scrolling through the posts she liked was like peeking into a dystopian handbook. Gems like How to Break His Independence and Steps to Establish Dominance in the Bedroom. My stomach turned. This wasn't my wife anymore. This was a fully indoctrinated member of the domestic dominance cult. And so I faced a choice. Bend the knee and accept my new role as obedient household pet, or fight back, either to salvage what was left of our marriage, or to walk away with my dignity intact. That night, I bunked in the guest room again, telling her I needed space to process. My calm, non-reaction rattled her more than if I'd flipped the table. She clearly expected compliance or an explosion. Instead, I handed her uncertainty, a tactical advantage I hadn't planned for, but gladly accepted. The next morning, Saturday, I left early claiming I needed to clear my head. In reality, I had a mission. If I was going to confront this properly, I needed intel. I met up with our mutual friend, Ronald, at a coffee shop. His wife had been close with mine before Carla slithered into the picture. After I laid out the story, Ronald shook his head. She's completely different, he said. No kidding, Ronald. I didn't marry a wife. I accidentally signed up for a hostile corporate takeover. My wife tried to talk to her last month after Carla made some, let's call them concerning comments about training me properly. I can only imagine the scene. Carla, ever the motivational speaker in a pantsuit, practically interrupted every sentence. Women need to reclaim their power in relationships, she announced like a TED Talk gone rogue. My wife must have felt like she'd walked into a hostage negotiation and was now being coached by the hostage taker. I got confirmation from Ronald later, which matched exactly what I'd been suspecting all along. This wasn't about bedroom rules or clarity of expectations. Oh no. My wife had been methodically influenced to treat our marriage like a gladiator arena. She needed to win. Carla's divorce had clearly scrambled her brain. According to Ronald, she was convinced her marriage had failed because she'd allowed her husband too much freedom. Now, naturally, she was on a mission to prevent other wives from making the same horrific mistake by controlling literally everything in their lives. So that explained the sudden fixation on control. My wife wasn't whimsically inventing rules. She was following a playbook drafted by a woman whose own marriage imploded spectacularly, desperately trying to avoid the same fate using methods that were about as subtle as a sledgehammer. I thanked Ronald, left the coffee shop, and drove home with greater clarity, and a growing sense that I might need to hire a lawyer specializing in domestic strategy games. I knew how not to handle this. Direct confrontation would trigger to defensiveness. Negotiating the rules would imply I agreed they were legitimate. Passive-aggressive compliance would end in emotional bankruptcy. No, this required a strategy, a carefully calculated, tactical response that addressed the root problem, restoring the respect and equality our marriage was supposed to be built on. When I got home, she was in the kitchen preparing lunch, moving like a drill sergeant inspecting the troops. She texted me 3 times while I was out, each message sharper than the last, demanding we finalize our arrangement. We need to talk about the rules, she said the moment I walked in. We will, I replied, calm as a monk in a hurricane. But first, I'd like to take you to dinner tonight somewhere nice. Her eyebrows shot up. Are you finally ready to discuss the terms? I'm ready to have an important conversation about our marriage, I said, keeping my tone neutral, measured, annoyingly calm. Meanwhile, I think we both need a day to relax. Why don't you get a massage this afternoon? My treat. Her expression softened. She probably assumed my sudden generosity signaled my imminent capitulation. I inwardly chuckled at her naivete. Sure, she said, clearly imagining me writing a check to my own humiliation. Once she left for the spa, I settled in to craft my response, not in anger or panic, but with careful deliberation. I revisited old wedding photos, reread our anniversary cards, and reminded myself what 5 good years of marriage had looked like. I wasn't ready to throw that away, but I also wasn't about to sacrifice my self-respect to keep it intact. That evening, I made reservations at the upscale restaurant where we'd celebrated our first anniversary. I dressed sharply, drove us there in comfortable silence, and insisted we be seated in a private corner. Privacy was essential. She might need to consult her notebook, presumably to tally my concessions like a corporate audit. After ordering, she produced the inevitable, a small notebook, clearly ready to log my compliance, objections, or any small sign of weakness. I stared at it, unfazed. Before we discuss your list, I began calmly. I want to understand something. What exactly do you hope these rules will accomplish in our marriage? She straightened, as if rehearsing her PowerPoint. Structure and clarity. Relationships fail when expectations aren't clear. I'm taking initiative to define parameters that will benefit us both. Interesting, I said. And were you planning to follow similar rules yourself? Her mouth went slightly slack. The rules are about your behavior, not mine. Oh. So it wasn't about mutual expectations. It was about controlling my behavior. Got it. I leaned back, smiling mildly. Boundaries are something we establish together. What you've created is a unilateral set of demands. Her eyes narrowed. Frustration was creeping in. She hadn't expected me to challenge the premise, only the rules themselves. Are you going to accept them or not? She asked finally, sounding like a child threatening a timeout. I've prepared my response, I said, reaching into my jacket. But first, I want you to know that I remember the woman I married. Someone who valued partnership, mutual respect, and genuine connection. I hope she remembers that, too. I placed a sealed envelope on the table between us like a bomb marked handle with care. She looked at it, then at me, uncertainty flickering across her face. Open it, I said, calm as if I were instructing someone to fetch coffee. It contains my one simple response to your 15 rules. She reached for the envelope with visible trepidation, her fingers trembling like she was about to defuse a nuclear device. I kept steady eye contact, deliberately neutral, my poker face in full effect. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not a counterproposal, not a negotiation, nothing polite or collaborative. Nope. It was a preliminary divorce agreement. Basic info filled in, neat, organized, complete enough to make my point. I was serious. Not filed, not final, just a dramatically illustrative. Her face went pale, the color draining faster than a cheetah chasing an antelope. What is this? She whispered, though the answer was screaming from the paper. My response, I said evenly. You presented me with 15 rules that fundamentally change the nature of our relationship. This is my counteroffer. One simple choice. She stared at the document, then back at me, shock written across her face like a badly drawn comic strip. You're filing for divorce because I set some boundaries? No, I corrected, leaning back like I was enjoying a fine wine. I'm showing you what happens when one person unilaterally dictates the terms of a marriage. What you gave me wasn't a set of boundaries. It was an ultimatum. You've turned a partnership into a power dynamic where you control even our most intimate moments. Her hands started shaking more visibly, like maracas at a salsa party. But I thought you'd just discuss the rules, maybe suggest changes, she stammered. Which would have validated the premise that you have the authority to impose these rules in the first place. I let her statement hang in the air, then calmly replied, I reject that premise entirely. Our food arrived, slicing through the tension like a sharp knife into butter. The waiter placed our plates down. Neither of us moved. I considered making a joke about, well, at least someone's following instructions, but decided restraint was funnier. This is extreme, she said, her voice rising slightly. All marriages have rules and expectations. Greedy, yes, I countered, keeping my tone measured. But healthy marriages establish those expectations together, through mutual respect and consideration. What you did was draft a contract treating me as a subordinate who needs regulation, rather than a husband who deserves respect. I paused to sip water, savoring the shock simmering in her eyes. Let me ask you something, I continued. Where did these rules come from? Did you create them based on your own needs, or are you following someone else's template for how to control your husband? Her sudden avoidance of eye contact was answer enough. I raised an eyebrow. Carla suggested some of them. Yes, and I added my own, she admitted reluctantly, like a kid caught red-handed with cookie crumbs on her face. And the books and forums? I pressed. The ones about establishing dominance and breaking a man's independence? Her eyes widened as if I'd just announced I knew where the bodies were buried. You went through my browsing history, just like you went through my phone, my emails, my closet, and now apparently want to regulate my body and sexuality, she said, incredulous. I countered without raising my voice. The difference is I did it to understand why my wife suddenly transformed into someone I don't recognize. She looked down at the divorce papers again, the reality sinking in. You can't be serious about this. 5 years of marriage, and you'd throw it away over a list. That's precisely my question to you, I said, leaning forward slightly. Are you willing to throw away our marriage over your need to control me? Because that's what this list represents, the death of equality and mutual respect in our relationship. I watched her eyes narrow, trying to process the message. The woman I married valued partnership. We made decisions together. We respected each other's autonomy. Our intimate life was an expression of mutual desire and connection. I let the words land like a hammer, not a scheduled performance with evaluation forms. Something shifted in her expression, the first real crack in the impenetrable facade of certainty she'd been projecting like some kind of CEO presenting quarterly earnings. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the woman I had married, looking back at me with confusion, fear, and maybe a touch of regret. What do you want from me? She finally asked, her voice smaller, almost timid, as if she'd just realized the stakes of her own chess game. I want my wife back, I said simply, keeping my tone calm, almost boringly reasonable. Not this new version who treats marriage like a PowerPoint presentation on domination strategy. I want a woman who saw us as equals, who didn't need to control every aspect of my behavior to feel secure. I gestured casually to the divorce papers like they were a particularly dull prop in an otherwise dramatic scene. Those aren't filed yet. Whether they ever are depends entirely on your next move. But understand this, I will not live according to your rules. I will not be evaluated, scheduled, and regulated in my own marriage. Either we rebuild this relationship on mutual respect, or we don't have a relationship at all. She stared at the document as if it were an alien artifact, blinking like she might wake up from a very vivid nightmare. When she finally looked up, tears had begun to form, threatening to betray the composure she'd clung to for weeks. I don't want a divorce, she whispered. Then you have a decision to make, I said gently but firmly, leaning just slightly forward, careful not to spook her further. You can have a husband who is an equal partner, or you can have these rules. You cannot have both. I reached across the table, not touching her, just offering an open hand like a diplomatic envoy. The choice is yours, I said almost theatrically. Choose carefully because this moment will define our future together or apart. The restaurant continued its gentle hum around us. Other couples laughing, clinking glasses, blissfully unaware that they were witnessing what could only be described as a high-stakes marital episode of Survivor, Dining Edition. My wife stared at my outstretched hand, then back at the divorce papers, the weight of her decision pressing down on her like a very judgmental guillotine. Tears began to spill silently, running down her cheeks without a single swipe to hide them. For nearly a minute, she froze, staring at the papers like they might magically turn into a coupon for free dessert. Then, with trembling fingers, she tore them in half. Then quarters. Then smaller pieces, until the document had been utterly destroyed. I don't want this, she said, her voice breaking. I don't want to lose you. I maintained my composure, resisting the urge to clap. Tearing up the paper didn't solve anything. I could print another copy if nothing changed. She pushed the pile aside and reached for my hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't realize what I was doing to us. I think you did, I replied, not unkindly, but firmly. You made deliberate choices. What I need to understand is why. What happened to make you believe controlling me was necessary for our marriage to work? She withdrew her hand, looked away, a mix of embarrassment and sadness coloring her expression like a badly blended Instagram filter. The restaurant hummed quietly around us, glasses clinking, servers chatting, and yet it felt like the world had reduced to just the two of us. It started with Carla, she finally admitted, voice small. After her divorce, she kept saying she failed because she'd given her husband too much freedom, that men need boundaries and control, or they inevitably leave or cheat. And you believed her? I asked, eyebrows arched in disbelief, despite 5 years of evidence in our own marriage proving otherwise. Not at first, she said. But she was so convinced, so certain. She introduced me to her support group. Other women who follow this philosophy. They're all success stories, I'm guessing? I interrupted dryly. Except Carla, of course, who's divorced. Classic. Yes, she admitted quietly. She says that's because she implemented these strategies too late. She looked down at her untouched food like it had betrayed her somehow. I know how it sounds saying it out loud, she continued, but when you're in that echo chamber, hearing the same message repeatedly from multiple sources, it starts to make a twisted kind of sense. I studied her face, searching for the glimpses of the wife I knew, the one who hadn't turned marriage into a tactical war game. And the color rose in her cheeks, a little blush revealing the human being hiding beneath the rulebook facade. Carla's group recommended them. Apparently, these women had convened like some secret society with PowerPoint slides and highlighters, preaching that modern marriages fail because women have surrendered their natural authority in the household. Their conclusion? Reclaiming control is essential, especially in intimate matters. So the bedroom rules weren't really about intimacy at all, I said, trying to sound calm but failing spectacularly. She nodded almost imperceptibly, like a guilt-ridden bobblehead. They're about control, I added, leaning forward slightly. Her voice had dropped so low I practically had to bend in half to hear her. The group leader, she says regulating physical intimacy is the fastest way to establish dominance in a relationship. Once the husband accepts the first set of restrictions, his resistance to other forms of control diminishes rapidly. The calculated nature of it hit me like a surprise boxing jab to the ribs. Conditioning. I was being conditioned like a lab rat for obedience, with a mandatory gratitude seminar included. Fresh tears welled in her eyes. When you put it that way, there's no other way to put it, she murmured. I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended. You were deliberately manipulating me as part of a strategic plan to remove my agency in our relationship. She covered her face with her hands. I was scared, she admitted through her fingers, sounding more like a guilty child than my life partner. Carla and the others kept warning me that if I didn't take control, I'd end up abandoned like them. They made it sound inevitable that all men eventually leave unless they're properly managed. And what evidence did they present to support this theory? I asked, eyebrow raised like a skeptical game show judge. Besides their own failed relationships, testimonials, she said, her voice small, clearly aware how flimsy that sounded. Women who claim these techniques save their marriages. Did you ever meet these women? Speak with their husbands. She shook her head. So you were willing to destroy what we built together based on the advice of strangers on the internet and a divorced friend who's clearly working through her own issues? I asked, unable to hide the incredulity in my tone. Her hands fell to the table, makeup streaked by tears. When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. It is ridiculous, I agreed. But it's also deeply hurtful. You didn't trust in us, in me, enough to resist this toxic influence. I was wrong, she whispered, finally reaching for my hand. This time, I let her take it. I got caught up in fear and bad advice, she said, eyes pleading. But this isn't really me. You know that, right? The woman you married wouldn't have done this. I studied her closely, weighing her sincerity against the methodical control campaign she'd been running. The question loomed, does that woman still exist? Or has she been replaced by someone who views me as an adversary rather than a partner worthy of respect? She exists. I exist, she said, squeezing my hand desperately. Please, tell me how to fix this. I withdrew my hand gently, but firmly. That depends on what fixing means to you. If you're looking for the minimum gesture to avoid divorce while continuing the same underlying pattern, there's nothing to discuss. No, she said emphatically. I want us back. The real us. Then we have work to do, I said, leaning back. Beginning with your list. We didn't finish our meal that night. Instead, we paid the bill and drove home in contemplative silence. Once inside, she went straight to our bedroom and returned holding the infamous list, hands trembling slightly. What do you want me to do with this? She asked, standing in the middle of the living room like a kid caught with contraband. Whatever you do should be your decision, I said, taking a seat on the couch. Not mine. Not Carla's. Not some forum. What you genuinely believe is right for our marriage. She looked down at the paper, then back at me, and without hesitation, tore it into pieces. This time, the movements were deliberate, decisive, not the frantic energy she'd used with the divorce papers at the restaurant. When she finished, she let the fragments fall into the fireplace. I want to burn it, she said. I want to watch it disappear completely. I nodded, handing her the matchbox from the mantel. She struck a match, dropped it onto the torn paper, and watched as the flames consumed the evidence of her misguided attempt at control. That's a start, I said as the last pieces blackened and curled. But paper is easy to destroy. Rebuilding trust is considerably harder than tearing up papers or delivering dramatic ultimatums. She sat beside me on the couch, carefully maintaining a respectful distance as if I were some delicate antique she'd almost broken. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, voice earnest. "First," I replied, leaning back with my hands steepled like a wise judge about to pass sentence, "I need to know everything. How deep does this go? What other aspects of our life together have been influenced by this philosophy?" For the next 3 hours, she spilled the beans with a sincerity that bordered on exhausting. Subtle manipulations I hadn't even noticed came to light. Messages from male friends mysteriously deleted from my social media. My favorite clothes accidentally shrunk in the wash. She'd even called my boss once, posing as a medical office to get me out of a business trip. Each revelation stung like a paper cut, but I kept my composure. This wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about laying the foundation for transparency. "What about Carla and this group?" I asked when she finally paused, catching her breath like she'd just run a marathon. "I'll cut contact completely," she said immediately. "I already deleted the forum account while you were in the bathroom at the restaurant. I was so ashamed when I saw your face as you described what I'd been doing. And how do I know this isn't just another strategic retreat? A temporary concession to regain my trust before you roll out the next subtle phase of the same plan?" My voice was harsh but fair. She flinched, then met my gaze. "You don't," she admitted. "Words mean nothing right now, but I'm hoping that over time my actions will prove this is real." She hesitated, then added, "I've also booked an appointment with a therapist. Myself. Not couples counseling yet. I need to understand why I was so easily influenced to betray everything we built together." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a good step. But I want to be clear," I continued, standing and pacing like I was in some internal courtroom drama. "I'm not staying in this house tonight, or possibly for several nights. I need space to process everything." Fear flashed across her face. "Are you leaving me?" "No," I said, smoothing the line between stern and sarcastic. "I'm taking time to think." "There's a difference." I packed a small bag while she hovered in the doorway, silent, watching me like a curious cat. "When will you come back?" she finally asked, voice small. "When I'm ready," I replied. "Not before. And when I do, we'll establish new boundaries together. Mutual expectations based on respect, not control. Before you leave," I added, turning to her, "one more thing. I want access to your phone and accounts. The same level of transparency you demanded from me. Not because I want to control you, but because trust needs to be rebuilt from the ground up." She handed over her phone without hesitation. "Unlocked. Everything's open. No more secrets." The next week became a period of careful reconstruction. I stayed at a hotel for 3 nights, using the solitude to figure out what I truly wanted. When I returned, the slow process of rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms began. Therapy twice weekly. Friendship with Carla terminated, despite her attempts at manipulation. Most importantly, she gradually returned to the woman I had married, thoughtful, respectful, and treating me as a partner rather than a subject to be controlled. 6 months later, our marriage was stronger than it had been in years. Intimacy that had once been scheduled, measured, and analyzed with terrifying efficiency returned, now guided by mutual desire, humor, and open communication, not bureaucratic power dynamics. We made decisions together. We respected each other's independence while choosing to build a life together. Last week, she handed me an envelope. It looked eerily similar to the one that had contained her infamous rules, but inside was a completely different kind of list. Not demands, but expressions of gratitude for the ways I'd supported her over the years, and sincere apologies for losing sight of the partnership we'd built. "Your one simple response changed everything," she wrote at the end. "You could have matched control with control or simply walked away. Instead, you offered a clear choice that forced me to confront what I was destroying. Thank you for fighting for us when I'd forgotten what we were worth fighting for." Sometimes the most powerful response to someone trying to control you isn't anger or submission. It's the quiet strength of knowing your own worth and refusing to accept anything less than the respect you deserve. My wife's list of bedroom rules didn't just disappear that night. It was replaced by something far more meaningful, a genuine recommitment to the equality and mutual respect that make a marriage worth having in the first place. Dear listeners, if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss future updates.